You're listening to the Josh Parnell Leadership Podcast. We all have leadership within us, and once we understand how to challenge perceived limitations, we're able to influence those we're leading. Josh is a leadership coach, trainer, and speaker. He's also a veteran of the United States Air Force with over 20 years of leadership experience. Are you ready to transform your leadership skills by tapping into unrecognized potential to achieve limitless results? Let's get ready for liftoff. It's time to go from great to greater. Here's Josh in today's episode.
Welcome to the Josh Parnell Leadership Podcast. Each episode, we look to transform our leadership skills by tapping into unrecognized potential to achieve limitless results. If you haven't done so, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. The more reviews that we receive, the more this podcast is able to reach people and build leaders. And as you know, that is my mission. So leave a review, share with your friends. And speaking of friends, I have a friend of mine joining us today. He is a fellow entrepreneur, and owner of an incredible company that he's going to share with each and every one of us. He's also a keynote speaker and a published author as of just a few days ago. So Cory Scheer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Josh. I finally have time in my schedule away from writing a book that I can spend it with you and not have my brain thinking about something else. So it is a huge relief for sure, as you know.
Of course. Well, glad you're here, Cory. How does it feel to have it behind you, have it getting, it just got released a few days ago. How does it feel?
It feels so good. And, when you see the digital version of it, it feels a sense of accomplishment. But when you actually hold the book, you feel a sense of completion. And there's two really distinct feelings, but it's been a great experience. It's been a big lift. It's been hard, but worth every single minute. And we may get into this a little bit later in the show, but I truly believe that everybody has their own story to tell and their own book to write. And oftentimes what we need is just clarity on what it is that we want to talk about, or who is it that we want to speak to about whatever it is that we have in our mind. And then also surrounding ourselves with a network of help, which of course you and I have had a great experience with Streamline Books, incredible support system and network of help. And I definitely could not have done the work that I did on the book without them. It would have been a different book, or honestly, it probably would have never gotten done.
Sure, 100%. And I can relate to that. Streamline is incredible, and they've been a big help to me as well. Well, Cory, man, I'm excited that you're here. It's an honor that you're on the show first of all. But second of all, go ahead and share with the audience who you are, what you do. Give us all the details about Cory Scheer.
Yeah, thank you. Honor to be with you, Josh. And we'll start with what matters most to me, which is I've been married now almost 25 years. As of February, we're coming up on our 25th. We've got 4 wonderful kids, 2 in college at the University of Missouri, and then 2 in middle school. We live in the Kansas City area, more specifically Liberty, Missouri, which is the northeast part of Kansas City. I am the founder and CEO of a company called TrustCentric. And at TrustCentric, what we do is we use data, both quantitative and qualitative, to help measure employee trust, and then work alongside leaders and their teams in order to improve workplace culture, help with staff retention, do lots of different workshops. I also do keynote sessions on trust. I've got doctoral research, national research, my book research, and then of course a lot of stories and research with my clients. So I love the work that I get to do, and I love being an entrepreneur. And it is a completely different experience than what I did for the prior many years. But I'm really thankful to be in a place where I can do this now full time and learn lots every single day. It's been kind of a whirlwind and a roller coaster. And a good friend of mine named Kurt told me that there is no rhythm being an entrepreneur. It's simply a matter of just keeping yourself locked in and in line with what it is that you need to do, and then also making sure that you're buckled in, because it's a pretty wild ride for sure. No 2 days are the same, and I have actually really come to appreciate and love that.
Very good. Well, I think we can both agree. I think a lot of people can agree that trust is really the foundation of any relationship, whether it be personally, professionally. So let's hang on the topic of trust. Your book is about trust. If you would share the title of your book, what your book is about, but also I'm curious, what got you into this field? What about this niche of trust? Where did this come from?
Yeah, the book itself is called Closing the Trust Gap. And then the subtitle is called Taking Action on What Matters Most for Leaders, Teams, and Organizations. And it was actually my wife who encouraged me to name the book Closing the Trust Gap. I was actually going to call it something different. I was going to call it the Trust Proposition, which I know we'll talk more about that later. And she told me, she said, instead of making the title the solution, why don't you make the title the problem? And it hit me, and I so appreciated that feedback. And we were driving west on I-70 to Colorado, and I kind of looked at her and I just said, that's the title of the book. So we went with it, and that really became such an important moment in my book writing experience. But more than that, it's given me new language and new clarity and a sharpened focus on the work that I get to do with clients as well. That really my goal in terms of my company is to help close the trust gaps that are oftentimes very pervasive within organizations. Sometimes they're known, sometimes they are not known, sometimes they are perceived as just inconveniences or the way things are. But through data and assessment and conversation and discovery and uncovering these types of things that are very important within an organization, we can really examine what are the gaps, and then most importantly, how do we actually close those trust gaps? And how we do that is through what I call the structure of trust, and implementing the structure of trust is a part of an overarching strategy, which is to live out our trust proposition, which is, it sounds like the value proposition. It's not the value proposition. It's different than. Both are very, very important, but the trust proposition focuses on something different than the value proposition does.
And I think a lot of us may have heard the term value proposition before. I'm going to ask Cory, how do we shift our paradigm, our own mindset on going from a value proposition type of mentality to a trust proposition, and why is it important?
Yeah, great question. It's important because the research shows that if your starting point is the value proposition in an attempt to gain customer loyalty, you've missed out on a critical step in the process. So instead of it being a two-step process of develop your value proposition, deepen your value proposition so that you can have customer and employee loyalty, what the research shows from a couple of decades ago from 3 market researchers, they did this great study with the airline industry and the retail industry. This was the theoretical framework that I used in order to run all of my data through in my doctoral program about 12 years ago. And what they found was that instead of starting with value and then going to loyalty, you actually have to do one more step further upstream. You have to strengthen trust. So the equation is not value, then loyalty. It's actually trust, then value, then loyalty. It's important, though, to delineate the difference between value and trust. And the easiest way for me to think about the difference between those two is that a value proposition is really about taking action on the worth of something. So you have to make a decision with either your time or your money or your efforts or your resources. Is what I am about to invest in, is it worth it to me? So I have to define what is the worth, and then I make a decision on whether or not I spend that time or that money on that. That is the value proposition. The trust proposition is different. The trust proposition is about taking action on the truth of something. So, for example, you and I both dressed alike tonight. We did not color coordinate it. It's just the way it is. Yeah. It is Thursday, so we're going black shirts today.
Yeah.
And so in that, if I were to tell you, no, Josh, like I'm wearing a yellow shirt today, and I'm wearing a yellow shirt, and whether you believe me or not, I'm telling you I'm wearing a yellow shirt. And whether you value the color yellow or not, it has nothing to do with value. It has everything to do with, but that's not the truth. And so if I automatically out of the gate tell you something that is not truthful, or we're not on the same page about the truth, there's no way that we can fully get to a value proposition together. We will have broken trust. There will be a gap in trust, and that will affect our relationship moving forward, where you will get off this podcast and go, why in the world did he say that he was wearing a yellow shirt? I don't get that. And so then if I were to come back to you and say, hey, would you be interested in this? Or, hey, can I offer this to you? You in your mind, you would be affected. Your value proposition would now be affected because we did not start a relationship with truth, with trust. And that, if you were to make that, 100x or 1,000x, or if that dynamic of a lack of truth or trust is within an organization, it really deeply affects the workplace culture. It affects employee retention, and it affects their loyalty, their advocacy, all of those things that are vital for a workplace culture. If there is no trust, if there is no foundation or cornerstone of trust, it will have a deep effect downstream with value and also loyalty.
There's a number of, I love the fact that all of the information that you provided and that you're going to provide on this episode, but also in your book, it's all backed by data. It's factual. And I'm on your website right now, which normally I give the guest the opportunity to share the website at the end of the episode, but I'm going to go ahead and plug it right now. If you go to TrustCentricConsulting.com, you'll see a number of different pieces of data popping up on the screen. 66% of employees in medium-sized organizations aren't likely to work as hard when they don't trust the leaders, or 51% of employees don't have a high level of trust for their leaders. And this is all backed by the National Survey on Brand and Trust. And so this is two stats or two pieces of data across a number that is on your website. But it's so important that we recognize how important and impactful trust is in any relationship, because without trust, as you mentioned to your point, Cory, there's no value proposition if there's no trust.
No. That's right. And so then the question is, I talk with a lot of people about, because as I explain what I do, I let them know that not a why company. We don't need to convince people why trust is important. Like it's a universal truth. We know that it's important. We're much more of a how company. And that delineation has been really important. So we can argue why something is or isn't. We know that trust is vital. So the question is, how do you do it? And that is really the trust proposition. That's how we take action on it. And the most important thing with trust, I think, as I share this with people now, all across the country, and I've got clients in Canada now, and as we talk more and more about this, one of the things that tends to really resonate with them most is what we call the structure of trust. And the researchers 20 years ago found that there are 3 vital building blocks to trust. And there are lots of books, there's articles that have been written about the various components or the different elements of trust, and they're all good and they're all important. Our method, our structure is something that we try to keep very simple. And to your point, it's research backed and research based. And those 3 building blocks of trust, the first one is competency. So that means leadership competency, communication competency, time management competency, financial competency, all of the things that typically you would want to hire somebody for on their resume. Of course, those competencies are vital. For example, when you hop on the next airplane, if your pilot does not have technical competence, you are going to be a very nervous customer. And if you go to a doctor's office and they do not demonstrate competence, there's hundreds of thousands of different jobs that if your competency is not fully lived out, you're going to be a danger to your customers and to your employees. So competency is vital, but it's not enough. It's not fully complete when we think about how trust is lived out. The second building block is the building block of problem solving. So we not only have to be competent, but we also have to demonstrate problem solving. And it's not enough to just be good at the process of problem solving. The most important thing our research shows is not the process of problem solving, it's actually defining the right problem to solve. That was an interesting finding from our national data. And when Kurt Bartolich, who is the CEO of Brand Certain, and we did this research, there were several data points that arose to the top that were fascinating. This was one of them, that problem solving, the process is important, but more important than that is employees get frustrated when their leaders are not accurately identifying the problem to solve. And then the third building block is the building block of caring for others. And this building block is the one that we see through our data as being the most difficult for organizations to actually keep strong. They typically have high levels of competence, then problem solving is next in strength, and then caring for others is a distant third. And this is where things like empathy and sympathy and emotional intelligence and appreciative inquiry and listening actively, all of these things that people might call soft skills, which I always say, if it's such a soft skill, why is it so hard to find in organizations? And, when we see the data and we deploy our organizational trust assessment, typically we always see organizations that struggle the most with this building block of caring for others. The last thing I'll say about the structure of trust, you have to have competency, problem solving, and caring for others and all three of those together. They apply to the realm of people within the organization, but they also apply in the realm of policies and practices. So you may have the most competent, problem-solving, caring for others type of individuals, but if they are trying to live out a program or a policy or a pricing structure that is not trustworthy, the organization will never be able to fully realize its value proposition and then have customer loyalty. In the same way, you may have world-class policies and practices and programs, but if you've got untrustworthy or toxic individuals trying to live those out, the same effect will occur where you ultimately will lose customers and employees because they will not want to be affiliated with your organization. So it's both the people and the policies and practices. They must contain those three building blocks, like the three legs of a stool: competency, problem solving, and care for others. And I'm sure you could think of brands or organizations that you're fiercely loyal to. And if you traced it back to the value proposition and then even further upstream to if they are demonstrating competency, problem solving, and care for others, I would guess that you would say yes to all three of those.
Right.
Whatever brand that you are loyal to, you would probably be able to trace it back to a very trustworthy experience.
This is so good, Cory. This is something that every organization needs to hear. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so that third component of what you just shared is they're all critical, but to your point, you said caring for others is arguably the most important. And I agree with you. If it's a soft skill, why is it so hard for people to genuinely care about, or at least just show how much you care? And that's the problem that a lot of people, I think, run into is a lot of us genuinely care for other people, but for whatever reason, we let work and the content of the work and all the other things get in the way of just showing how much we care for them. And for a lot of us, we're with our team more than we're with our own family. So why not exercise that opportunity to show them how much we truly care?
One of the things that we wanted to find out is we know that these three building blocks are important, but what specifically can I do? So let's say in the building block of caring for others, of all of the things that I could do. And what we didn't find on our research was pizza party Fridays were not at the top of the list. Employee parking spots were not at the top of the list. Cookies in the mailbox were not at the top of the list. Beer koozies were not at the top of the list. None of these things, these kind of transactional, in a lot of ways, feeble efforts to try to prop up trust through caring for others in this transactional way, none of these things emerged and rose to the top. The number one way to strengthen the building block of trust for caring for others is by actively listening, by 6 percentage points over anything else. It doesn't cost you anything but some time. It requires intentionality, follow-up. It doesn't even require the correct answer or the full answer. It's simply the act of listening, and listening in a way to where you're demonstrating care for them, that you're genuinely concerned, that it's not distracted or you're not looking over here or having 3 conversations at the same time. It's sitting, it's watching, it's looking at them, it's listening to them, repeating back what you've heard, and then letting them know how is it that you're going to follow up with them. It's the number one way to strengthen trust in that building block. And it's so simple. It's just something that is not common, but there's a huge opportunity to do that with our employees as well as with our customers, just simply listening.
One of the biggest compliments that I've gotten as a coach is how for organizations who are utilizing my one-on-one coaching services, the importance and the impact of the one-on-ones that I encourage each person to have has been a game changer for their business. We know there's a difference between hearing someone and listening to someone, because if we're hearing someone, we're simply waiting for them to stop talking so we can tell them what we want to say. But if we're listening to someone, we're receiving information, we're processing information, we're utilizing that information to best serve that person. And that's truly how we can show them how much we care. It's connection before content. And for a lot of people, especially in any kind of professional relationship, we feel the need to dive into the content and the work side of things before getting to know who this person is, know the person before the process, the name before the job title, and being an active listener is something that everyone can exercise in order to accomplish gaining trust.
The results are amazing. I mean, even in the selling process, if you are involved in sales in any way, the thought of never sell, only serve. So if I'm in a sales call or if I'm in the process of sales or discovery, it's like, if I can go in and just say, I'm not going to sell, I'm not going to be salesy, I'm going to serve, I'm going to demonstrate a trustworthy approach. I am going to be competent in my product knowledge, in my pricing. I'm going to demonstrate that I deeply understand their problem that they probably need to solve or help them discover what that problem is. And then I'm going to show care and concern for them. And I'm going to do it in a way that is through listening, not through telling. But imagine approaching every conversation, whether it's with an employee or a potential customer or an existing customer, with that frame of reference of saying, all I want to do is just, I want to serve them. I want to be someone that is trustworthy to where even if I don't get their business, they will know that I had their best interests in my mind and I was as trustworthy as possible. And honestly, if we do that, probably the majority of time, you will at a minimum get a second conversation, and it's probably pretty likely that you'll probably get their business, because how you've approached that is an uncommon approach that they are not expecting. But if you can strengthen trust and do it in a way that is methodical and in a way that is systematic of really identifying those three structural elements, it's exciting, the conversations that occur, because you realize that you're now having an authentic conversation versus one being shallow or transactional, or one that they will probably forget, honestly, as soon as you walk out of the room.
I love hearing that, especially coming from someone I have a background in sales as a trainer with an incredible organization. And something we regularly talked about was the guest experience should be treated as a relationship and not a transaction. Because if we can focus on serving this guest, loving this guest, taking care of this guest, the transactions, it's a natural byproduct of exceptional standard setting service. And so, man, this is incredible. I cannot wait to get a copy of your book. I think everyone listening needs a copy of Closing the Trust Gap by Cory Scheer. Cory, you mentioned earlier about I heard the term organizational trust assessment. I'm a person who loves assessments. I love personality profile assessments. I love hiring assessments. I love all kinds of assessments. Tell the audience about what your organizational trust assessment is and how it can help.
Well, part of our process, we call it the TrustCentric process. We have 3 steps in our process, and the first step is to assess. We believe that it's impossible to have any kind of a solution-oriented conversation or engagement with a client unless we're doing some type of an assessment. It could be qualitative, it could be through discovery, it could be through evaluation, it could be through reviewing some of their existing survey or data or whatever the case may be. But where we typically like to start with organizations is with a tool that we have developed called the Organizational Trust Assessment. It takes 7 or 8 minutes. It is 49 data points. It actually covers all 3 of those building blocks. Competency, it looks at competency within employees and their perception of competency within the organization, their view on the problem-solving dynamics within the organization, and then also they evaluate caring for others. We look at 5 data points specifically regarding the employee's perception of trust of the external brand. So it's the employees that are actually evaluating the trustworthiness of the company's brand, which is a unique perspective. And then what we do is we invite them into looking at, over the next 6 months, what are the levels of priority that the organization needs to put on 5 key indicators of trust. So we not only look at the current state of their well-being as it relates to the organizational culture, but we also try to invite them into looking forward, so that as we do that, number one, we're looking at the data through the lens of the structure of trust. But then also, as we move through the data and the actual structure of trust itself, we can begin to look forward and start developing a plan, and then give them the solutions that they need to really start moving the needle. But that organizational trust assessment, it is the tip of the spear for the work that we do. It is vital. And then, of course, after 6 months or 12 months, we redeploy the same assessment. and it's anonymous, quantitative. And so we can look at a lot of good side-by-side data and see where are they making improvement, where is their opportunity to grow, where are some of their blind spots. And that is very, very helpful. Then it's not about personalities in the room or how long people have been in the organization. It's about their data. We hold up the mirror and say, it's okay. The reflection is fine. We can improve the current situation. You've done the first best thing, which is to look at the data. So now that we can move forward with truth, which is, again, it goes back to the trust proposition. They have to look at the truth of the organization before they can make any changes. Otherwise, it's false, it's hollow, and it's assumed. And that honestly would just be a waste of their money if they hired us to do work on their organization if they don't have a full understanding of the truth of their workplace culture.
That's so good. I feel like a question I should have asked earlier, Cory, because you identified the fact that everyone knows how important trust is. But a question I have is, why do you feel trust is so damaged right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are varying degrees of truth in organizations as it relates to what work looks like for certain individuals, what the goals of work are, what an organization, perhaps there's a lack of understanding of the vision of the organization. What we see within organizations that is the biggest trust gap that we see is between frontline employees or individual contributors and then the C-suite. And that gap in trust is typically around 31%. And so much of that has to do with a lack of communication, a lack of listening, a lack of clarity of vision, all of those elements within the structure of trust that are eroding. So when you ask, what is the problem? Well, it's either an issue of competency and or problem solving and or caring for others. I also think that we have come through a very traumatic season with work and culture and families and health from COVID. We have seen the Great Resignation in 2022, where 50.5 million people resigned from their jobs. That's a third of the workforce that left their old jobs, and now they've either reinserted into a new job or they're not working currently. And so that is such a massive shift in transition within the workplace. And then so many jobs that had to go to online or virtual right away, the systems that were changing. Then you have things like supply chain challenges within COVID. You've got political controversies. Like, there's so many elements. There's everybody's version of truth colliding at once in certain ways. It becomes a very difficult season to navigate through. And so because of that, we have an opportunity to really clarify, how do we diagnose? How do we introduce a shared framework? How do we take action on trust? How do we prioritize trust from something that is ethereal or squishy or uncertain to something that is measurable, and in a way it can be its own KPI because it can be measured. But in the same way that we look at net revenue and employee retention and inventory turnover rates, we can also look at our organizational culture through the lens of trust. The question is, are leaders in organizations, are they willing to do it? And if they're not, they will continue to struggle. If they are willing to do it, they have the courage to look at themselves in the mirror as an organization, they can begin to take the steps in the right direction to move the needle. And that's the goal of what we do.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. I think any organization needs to capture the opportunity to go through this organizational trust assessment. I'm hearing you say there's so many reasons as to why trust is damaged, and to one degree, it's differing perceptions, and we know that perception to that person is their reality. But there's differing perceptions, therefore different realities across an organization. I'm also hearing how important communication as a whole is, being able to effectively communicate and seeking first to understand, then to be understood, to be a good active listener for someone to show up empathetically, if that's a word, so that they can truly understand who this person is that I'm leading, that I'm working with, and being led by. I think it goes both ways. You mentioned there's a 31%, I think you said 31% gap in trust between C-suite and frontline employees. That's huge. And that's, to me, I'm thinking, there's there's no finger pointing to be had. There's no blame to occur. But when the organizational trust assessment is put in place so that you can close that gap, at that point afterwards, now what are we going to do about it? What is the solution?
Right.
Like what steps do we take? Can you speak to the most common steps that you see organizations needing to take once they decide to receive the truth through the assessment and then take action to improve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we measured that as well. Of all of the things that you could do, what are the most important things that you should be doing as you move forward? Because there's a lot of options. And if you're clear on what those things are, it begins with you have to develop a plan to strengthen organizational trust. We call that a blueprint for trust. And that means being intentional by listening, identifying the right problems to solve, doing a competency audit of all of your employees. Is your org chart, are there problems that are being created because there's a lack of communication or understanding just within the structure of your organization? Do your policies need refined? Is your pricing appropriate? Is your brand confusing? So this is an audit. It's like when you go get your oil changed, they don't just change your oil. They do a 42-point inspection on your vehicle. They always try to sell you that the air filter, and you say no, like I can go get that at the AutoZone or whatever, which we typically never do that anyway, but they're going to do a full diagnostic. If a nurse comes into your hospital room, they're not just checking in to see if you're okay. They always do the vital signs. So what is the plan? How do you operationalize it and integrate it into your day-to-day? The next thing is you've got to create opportunities where there's transparency and conversation, which that doesn't mean that I have to be completely transparent with every detail, because sometimes that's not appropriate, but a willingness to be transparent, a willingness to let them know when I'm no longer able to be transparent, and let them know that I will follow up with details as I get them and as appropriate. That's the second thing. The third thing is a clear ownership of tasks and responsibilities. One of the biggest areas where we see trust really break down is when there's a lot of initiatives and activities that's going on in an organization, but there's a lack of understanding of who actually owns it. And so those are just a few examples of several that you can really focus on. But the one most important way that you can really integrate a trust-first mentality, or we would call it a trust-centric way of thinking, is you have to embrace the structure of trust. You have to embrace what we know research says to be true, that trust is always built on three things: competency, problem solving, care for others. That's the starting point, to where you can move it from a podcast or a book or perhaps like an online course to where you're scribbling it on a sheet of paper or up on a marker board or a back of the napkin, to where you can say, is this an issue of competency and or problem solving and or care for others? How do we dimensionalize it? And then how do we move forward? How do we take the necessary steps to strengthen those building blocks? And if we strengthen those building blocks, we're going to see positive effects. And it sounds so simple, but it requires discipline and intentionality. And oftentimes it requires courage, because you are realizing that you've got some things to work on as an organization, which we would rather encourage people to define reality and move forward than settle with their status quo, wouldn't we?
Of course. Cory, you're describing how I think everyone should understand that leadership is truly a full-time job. And what I mean by this is, to your point, there's not necessarily a clear definition of tasks and responsibilities. So delegation is an opportunity for a lot of organizations, as in pairing that with communicating in the process. But what I've learned over the course of my experience as a coach primarily is how there's a lot of people who are missing the mark on, once they are promoted from a high-performing team member into a formal leadership role, they're still keeping a lot of the responsibilities that they were doing as that athlete, and now they're a coach, right? I mean, if we're using that analogy, they're transitioning from an athlete to a coach, but we see them struggling to stay in the coach's seat because they're there because of the job they were doing as the athlete, and they don't know how to communicate effectively, how to delegate effectively. The two things we want to create for anybody is safety and trust, so that we can provide two things, which is clarity and direction. And so this assessment, man, I'll tell you, like this episode has got me fired up because I need that book right now so that I can go through the book and read and understand and learn more. But this is something that I think every organization needs to capture. So I think you're onto something amazing. I know this is not going to be our last time on the Josh Parnell Leadership Podcast. Next time, Cory, we are going to be wearing yellow shirts to match earlier. So make sure we connect on that. But before we go, Cory, I'm going to ask that you share with our audience, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get in touch with you regarding the organizational trust assessment? How can they get a copy of your book? How can they get all things Cory Scheer right now?
Well, thank you again. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you. It's been an awesome conversation. It's gone by fast, and grateful for that, Josh, and grateful for the work that you do with your coaching and consulting and podcasts and the content that you're creating. It's fantastic. It's so needed. And there's always opportunities to also to encourage each other. And so grateful for that. As far as getting a hold of me, the best way to do that is, number one, would love to get connected on LinkedIn. And if you just look up Cory Scheer, Cory, and then Scheer, or you can look up my LinkedIn page, which is TrustCentric. My website is TrustCentricConsulting.com. And then if you want a copy of the book, it is on Amazon, and it just launched on December 1st. And you can go to www.trustgapbook.com, and would be so honored for you to buy a copy of that and read it. And if you love it, give it away to somebody else, maybe buy another copy. And I think it's something that will be very helpful for you. And my goal is that even if I never meet somebody in person, if they can read some of the content that I've spent a lot of time really thinking through and writing about, if that's helpful, then that's a huge win, because that's ultimately what I want to do, is serve people with this message and this framework and be helpful to them so that they can move more towards a state of flourishing as opposed to a state of flailing. And as they do that, they'll be able to lead others more effectively and cast a clearer vision and be more successful in the work that they do.
Love that, Cory. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, everyone go buy a copy, leave a book review as well. The more reviews he has, the more his book can get pushed out. And his book deserves to be pushed out because he is onto something really incredible that every organization needs to capture. So, Cory, once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning into the Josh Parnell Leadership Podcast. Each episode, I try to bring you new ideas, new insights, and new information regarding all things leadership. So whether it's guests like Cory Scheer or topics that we can all relate to, if you enjoy this podcast, I think you're going to enjoy my new book coming out in January titled Leading a Legacy, which dives into how we can live today to make an impact for tomorrow. The legacy that we lead determines the legacy that we leave. So as I sign off, I want to leave you with one more request, and that is to ask you to head on over to my website, thebeardedleader.com, to pre-order your copy of Leading a Legacy today. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Don't forget to smile today. Tell your loved ones how much they mean to you. I'm Josh Parnell, reminding you to keep leading well.